November 1st, 1984. As a child, I spent most of my time with my grandfather. It's not that my parents weren't in the picture, it's just that my grandfather did, and still does, have the attention span of a child. We were always going to the movie theater or the arcade, playing silly games and telling crude jokes. Occasionally, he would take me into the city where we would wander around and end up in random museums. We had nearly everything in common. The most important thing being our love of horror movies. I remember in 1978 when John Carpenter released what I believe to be one of the most chilling horror movies ever, Halloween. My grandfather had seen several of Carpenter's earlier releases and assured me that Halloween should be promising. He was more right than he could ever have imagined. Something inside of me awoke when I watched that film. A lusting, craving for a parallel situation in my own life. I had no desire at that time to kill. I felt very strongly the desire to be killed. And as I wasn't thoroughly pleased with my own life, the thought of dying had long since crossed my mind. Halloween immediately became my favorite holiday, if it weren't already. A few years later, when I was nearly 17, a movie was released by Sean S. Cunningham called Friday the 13th. After watching that movie, I immediately signed up for summer camp. I was determined to put myself in any and every position to be murdered. I knew that there was something wrong, something unhinged, but I figured it was just an enormous love of horror, and I presumed it was shared by such visionaries as Carpenter and Cunningham. I then realized that my fantasies could be reality. I unfortunately returned from summer camp in 1980. I took a job at an obscure haunted house, working as a zombie. I was severely dissatisfied. It was now that I began to seek thrills on my own. I decided I didn't need to be chased by an axe-wielding maniac. Needed only to believe that I was in danger of being chased by said maniac. I found solace in a small group of friends who enjoyed venturing into abandoned buildings and whatnot. Anything that might give them a cheap thrill while drunk or high. We called ourselves the Shadow Stalkers, or Stalkers for short. It's fucking stupid, but we were young. Our group consisted of the following. Maggie Brown, who was extremely bossy and temperamental, albeit absolutely hilarious. While somewhat violent, she always managed to stay prim. Born October 8th, 1963. Miles Claythorne, who, like all stoners, very rarely knew what was going on, but was really pretty goddamn wise. His thought process was much faster than he was on his own 2 feet. Born January 11th, 1963. Lucy Groves, who, despite her small physique, high femininity, and extremely good looks, was much tougher than all of the men present. Born April 16th, 1963. PASCAL Hobbes, who didn't always have something to say, but his peaceful presence was usually necessary. Simply seemed to click with everyone. Born November 27th, 1963. REYES, who thought it was funny to sulk off into the darkness, hide, and scare whoever walked by first. His attempts were rarely successful. Born February 23rd, 1963. Anna Rhymes, who was the brains of the operation. She was usually responsible for researching the location that we intended to trespass upon. Born September 14th, 1963. By August of 1984, I realized that the time had finally come for me to kill myself. I'm not going to go on and on about what the matter was. I'll simply say that I was dissatisfied with how my life had turned out. I had had enough. I was done with my family, I was done with my job, I was done with my friends. I was absolutely done. And so I bought a couple of bottles of wine, some sleeping pills, and sulked off into the woods. My plan was as follows. I was to drink the first bottle of wine and take a few sleeping pills. Then, as they're kicking in, I'll polish off as much of the second bottle as I can and a few more sleeping pills. When I start to doze, I would take the remainder of the pills and eventually just pass out. The pills' fatal effect wouldn't take place until I was already asleep. And hopefully, I would never wake up. But then I got to thinking, why should I die without ever getting to experience the one and only thing I ever wanted? It was now that I realized that in killing myself, I should implant myself into a real-life horror movie. As I was, of course, unable to obtain an escaped mental patient or a disturbed young camper with whom to plot my fantasy, I decided that I should have to do the dirty work myself. It took a while before I was fully comfortable with the idea of committing murders. I was sure that once I had a stalker pinned to the ground, I wouldn't be able to go through with it. And that would leave me in a very messy position. Though the more I thought about how much I had actually grown to hate them, the more I realized that they were absolutely what I needed to bring my lifelong goal to fruition. I had found a location for the murders. As a child, I remembered specifically an aunt who spoke of a still-standing sanitarium in Vermont known as the Hawthorne Medical Institute, though it had been nicknamed Bloodthorn. This hospital was allegedly the site of a grisly set of murders made by doctors on criminally insane patients in the 1970s. The souls of the patients were said to wander the halls. I admit that as much as I would have loved to believe in ghosts, I was definitely a skeptic. I was never afraid of anything supernatural because to me, horror is in reality. If I can't implant myself into the situation, then it was not scary. I wanted a cold-blooded killer, and I knew I would have to find it in myself. This hospital was located deep in the woods, far from most civilizations in Vermont. I was a little distraught with myself for not having remembered my aunt's stories back when I enjoyed going out with these people. But then, I suppose that when the inevitable time came for their and my miserable lives to end, I wouldn't have had an unknown location at which to do it. I contacted my aunt and asked her to give me more information. I wasn't worried about her knowing of my intent to go there, as it fit in with a regular routine that neither I nor any of the other stalkers kept secret. Why should we? Getting scared was what we did. If anything, I seem to recall offhand comments people would make stating, "You're gonna get yourself killed." If only. I made all the necessary arrangements, and the timing worked out that we would be gone from October 31st to November 1st, a Wednesday night, oddly enough. Scheduling the event for Halloween night was surprisingly simple, actually, considering that as young adults, our professions mostly took up our weekends. At that current juncture, everything was falling into place. Now, I feel it important before I get into all the details of the actual evening to describe my purpose. It is my intent to commit a series of murders, but I do not wish to be immediately recognized for them. If I didn't want to die, I would feel quite sure that I would be able to actually get away with my murderous spree. As you know, that is not the case. In my own mind, I've already worked out exactly when, where, and how each murder is to take place. But let's be honest. It's obvious that some things will need to change. I feel quite content that I should be able to kill each of these people and myself and make it look as though we were nothing but 6 helpless victims at the hands of a truly professional stalker. That is why I conceal myself and refer to each of the 6 shadow stalkers by name. I gather that the police will be smart enough to find this confession, yes, and then all will know the horrible things that I have done. That is not the issue, for you see, principle is what matters in this scenario. And knowing that the police could not solve the murders without the actual murderer literally handing in a fucking confession is the best thing I could ask for as a parting gift. The following events took place on Halloween night, 1984. I will be giving you the facts to the best of my remembrance. I feel obligated to inform you that I will be paraphrasing, as remembering precise quotes was not at the forefront of my mind. I am only human, however, and when I don't know what they're thinking, I'm just gonna fucking make it up, according to how well I know them. And believe me, when I say I know them each, inside and out, I will have my dream come true. I will be remembered as a helpless victim at the hands of an awful, awful being. And just when that starts to settle in, I'll hopefully be unveiled as the horrible being itself. There will still be those dense conspiracists who don't believe the statement, and at the end of the day, those people will be left wondering just who, if not me, killed those 6 kids at Bloodthorn Sanitarium. It will be blown far and widely out of proportion. I dream of a day when John Carpenter himself makes a movie based on the Bloodthorn murders, as I should hope they'll be called, or the Shadow Stalker Massacre, or something along those lines. I will be a legend. I will be the new Jason, the new Michael. I will be the Shadow Stalker. Friends stood in the parking lot of an abandoned sanitarium and took it all in. Despite their differences, they had one thing in common. They lusted for fear. Of the 6, Maggie was the most nervous. She always seemed to enjoy the idea of these places more than actually being there. She would never back out, but she did often cling to someone, usually Miles.
Why would they call it Bloodthorn? Like, that doesn't even make sense.
Hawthorne Medical Institute, not Bloodthorn. That was just a spooky name given to it after some rumors came up.
Rumors about what?
About doctors doing some messed up stuff on their patients. Anyway, it wasn't true. There was an accident like 10 years ago that led to it getting shut down. I looked into this place somewhat. The Hawthorns were a wealthy family who...
Blah, blah, blah. Let's just get started.
I'm pretty sure we can cover the whole premises as a group.
It's no fun without separating.
I'm all for splitting up, but there's no need. This place is relatively small.
I understand where you're coming from, Anna, but it's scarier when you're alone. And correct me if I'm wrong, but that's why we're here.
I don't mind splitting up, but I don't want to walk around this place alone. We should go in twos.
I'll explore with you since I assume you didn't do any research.
That's why you're here.
She changed her focus to the sound of 2 rocks clicking together in Miles's hand.
Will you drop those disgusting things and stop making that noise?
I'll go with PASCAL.
Asshole.
I guess that leaves us, Lucy.
Oh, so you'll be together for 5 minutes before Will runs away and hides?
Essentially.
Suck it.
Anna announced the 3 starting points.
1 pair will start in the west wing, 1 pair will start in the east wing, and the final group will start in those brick buildings down the road. I think they were offices.
This pair business, it's stupid. I just want to wander around.
Then wander around. I don't need a partner either.
Just do what you want. Anna and I are going to start in the brick buildings. Figure it out.
And with that, she started down the road. Anna lingered for a moment, shrugged, and then followed her.
Where do you want to start?
I don't care. Let's just go into this main entrance and see which hallway looks the creepiest.
They all filed into the building's main entrance, which resembled a lobby. On the left was a pair of swinging hospital doors that led into darkness. On the right was another hallway and a decaying office.
I guess this was the front desk?
At the far end of the lobby was a giant staircase that led to the upper level. The group wandered around the main lobby, getting a feel for the building and letting their eyes adjust somewhat to the darkness. Miles was pushing a door that seemed stuck when he noticed Will disappear up the main stairs. Lucy had announced that she was venturing down the hallway to the right, and when she was gone, PASCAL approached.
I kind of wanted to pair with Lucy.
I'm so sorry. I didn't even think about that.
There was a long silence, with the exception of Miles slamming his body against the door.
Won't open.
It's stuck. It leads into the office, though, and I wanted to look through those filing cabinets.
PASCAL put his face against the glass and tried to peer through. He could see a few large tan filing cabinets, one of which was knocked over.
It would be awesome if there were still old files in those cabinets.
Plan is to get super baked, look at those files, and that's why I chose to pair up with you. Wouldn't that shit be so cool?
The 2 men pushed against the door with all their might, but to no avail.
Wait, what the fuck are we doing? This place is already a shithole.
And with that, he grabbed a large rock and hurled it at the glass. The rock went through, leaving a jagged hole.
I'm not climbing through a hole of broken glass.
Well, we'll just have to make the hole bigger. Help me find something to break the rest of the glass with. Please be careful.
As Lucy made her way down the hall, she shone her flashlight back and forth. To the right was an array of smaller rooms, mostly for much older files, while on the left was a mess hall and a kitchen. She sighed, unsure which to check out first. Truthfully, Lucy wouldn't have minded pairing with PASCAL. After all, he was the kindest, and he never brought up the fact that she was so masculine. She hated how the others were constantly bringing up her toughness, regularly comparing her to a man.
Why does the fact that I don't need my hand held through everything make me masculine? I don't feel like a man. I'm not a man, and yet everything about me just fucking screams man.
She had let the flashlight rest as she lost herself in resentful thought. It was resting on the words, Mess Hall, which sat above a door frame.
That's that, then.
She smiled, recognizing that she was taking for granted one of her favorite pastimes. She had taken only a step or two toward the cafeteria when there came a crash from the end of the hall. Lucy froze for only a second before relaxing. She wasn't the kind of person to let fear overcome her. It made her feel weak.
I am not weak.
This was only a noise. She knew that. She started down the hall back the way she came. When she exited the hospital doors back into the lobby, Pascal and Miles were breaking off small bits of glass still jutting out from the window's frame.
What the hell are you doing?
Oh,
The door wouldn't open. We wanted to see if there was files in the front office.
Oh, rad. Did you get all the glass out of the way?
Pretty much.
I want to see.
Lucy was the first to climb over into the office. Miles followed her, then Pascal.
how far along were you when you heard the glass breaking?
Lucy repeated her moment of indecisiveness to them as she pulled open the first filing cabinet's top drawer.
Amazing.
There are actually files here?
Drawers and drawers of them.
They're all dusty.
Whoa. What the hell? Heather Henderson?
Who's Heather Henderson?
Who's Heather Henderson? Really?
I don't know who that is either.
Oh. I swear the name was Heather Henderson.
Well, who the hell is that?
Well, when I was little, my brother used to tell me about this lady. Her name...
You're stoned.
Yeah, but she
Give me
was...
the file.
Miles handed over the file, and Lucy read it aloud.
Heather Henderson. Age 27, but that was in 67.
She'd be 44 now.
Yeah. She was locked up here for murdering her family.
How many were there?
I remember this shit now. This chick, like, killed her mom and her dad and her 2 younger brothers and stuck the dog in the oven. That's what my brother told me. I didn't know that shit was true. I thought he was just screwing with me.
And then, a noise from the main staircase. They all froze for only a moment before reason set in.
Oh, it's Will.
That asshole's eavesdropping.
It says here that Heather Henderson never died. She returns here every year. Every year on Halloween. Well, fuck you too.
The three burst into an uproarious laugh and started to climb out of the office one by one.
Put that file away in your backpack and we'll show it to the others later. I'm going back down the hallway I came. There were more files like that down there. I should be there for a while if you need me.
Pascal climbed through the window and turned around. He extended a hand to Miles to help him out and asked,
Do you want to go down the other hall?
I kind of want to look at these files some more. Don't you want to go with Lucy?
I don't know. She seems to be doing her own thing. I'll go check out the other hall, and you can catch up with me later.
Yeah, that's cool. Wait. Do you want to hit this?
She doesn't like it when I smoke weed.
You're not even dating yet. You can quit smoking when you're committed. Plus, you know it enhances the frightening experience.
I guess.
Lucy was sifting through files, but
Boring.
she decided she would go with her original plan to check out the cafeteria and rose to her feet. However, when she started across the room, the door slammed shut. Lucy froze. It was barely a second before she started to theorize.
It's either the wind or it's Will. What an asshole. Who's there?
Lucy played along. There was a long silence before she deduced that it may have actually been the wind. And then there was a single knock.
Cute. Who is it? Well, now I'm bored of this. You were doing all right at first, Will.
She pulled open the door. She stepped into the hall.
Will?
She tried to peer through the darkness, but couldn't see much of anything.
What am I doing?
She turned on her flashlight and shined it in both directions. And then she heard a noise from the mess hall. Lucy quietly tiptoed to the cafeteria doors. She opened the door only a little and peered in, but saw nothing but darkness. Then another noise from somewhere in that cafeteria.
If they're hiding in the dark, then I'll hide in the dark. May the best woman win, asshole.
Instead of opening the door any more and risking noise, she slid her small body through the open crevice and gently let it shut. She slowly moved to the side and backed herself against the wall.
Okay. Let your eyes adjust.
Standing in the darkness, Lucy's alertness was incredibly increased. She listened as closely as she could to everything around her. She could hear a faint dripping in the distance, and only now, when she was focusing her attention on all the sounds around her, did she hear how annoyingly loud the crickets really were. For a moment, Lucy forgot her intentions of finding Will and grimaced at the deafening sound of the crickets chirping. She began to feel slightly overwhelmed at the volume of the insects and started to think that she might not actually hear Will move around over the chirping. But then she heard a soft grunt from somewhere in front of her, followed by a loud crash on the other side of the cafeteria. Her imagination went a bit wild.
What if this isn't Will? What if it's some junkie or some homeless person? Fuck, this isn't good.
She began to think about all the rape stories she would hear about on the news. And then Lucy remembered she was above this.
Of course it's Will.
She felt sure that she could move around swiftly on her side of the cafeteria and hopefully hone in on Will on the other end, crashing into things. At last, her vision was adjusting to the darkness of the mess hall. She could see a few large cafeteria tables that had been left, and the large glass windows on the far wall provided some moonlight on that end of the cafeteria, but not much. She could see the area just beneath the windows, but nothing else. Then she saw peripheral movement. She spun around and looked toward where she had heard the grunt. She couldn't help but gasp when she spun and immediately regretted it. She smiled to herself and mentally complimented Will's preparedness on this outing.
You startled me. Good job, Will. You can go home now.
Suddenly, her eyes locked onto movement in the darkness. She was sure that she couldn't be seen against the wall, but she could see a clear figure zigzagging through the darkness, heading in her direction, but not directly at her.
Lucy inhaled deeply and began to creep toward the figure. As she got closer, she paid closer attention to the silhouette. She couldn't exactly make it out yet. At last, she was close enough, and then she pounced.
PASCAL was feeling somewhat out of the ordinary this evening. He was feeling playful and excited.
I can't place it, but I have a good feeling about tonight.
He loved Halloween. Most people wouldn't expect it of him. though when asked, they might not know what they expected. PASCAL kept to himself for a very good deal of his life, not because he was shunned or outcast, but because he was just happier in his own head. It was this sort of aloof quality that made people think he was simple, but he didn't mind.
People like things to be simple.
Admittedly, he was annoyed with how popular he actually was. He remembered being a child and everyone wanted to be his friend, and he would agree. And then there would be such expectations that he was never able to meet. He often left these people feeling disappointed, but he didn't mind. After all, it wasn't his problem that people set unrealistic expectations. He smiled presently and reflected on how he had even come to join the Shadow Stalkers. He was feeling particularly social one October and followed a cute girl into an after-school club. He later found out that while Maggie was externally beautiful and left a scented trail of gardenia everywhere she went, that was the extent of her beauty.
Lucy, on the other hand,
his memory was disturbed by the sound of footsteps coming up behind him. He quickly ducked into a small room and pulled the door almost closed.
What the fuck was that?
After a moment, he concluded that it must have been Miles finally catching up with him. He wouldn't have been surprised if Miles had smoked another joint in all that time. PASCAL was incredibly high himself as it happened. He smiled and thought to himself,
Guess I'm quicker than people give me credit for.
He now felt somewhat awkward, but PASCAL was comfortable with that feeling.
The footsteps stopped just outside the door. PASCAL took a step towards the door to listen closely, when it suddenly burst open, slamming him hard in the face. He fell back and sat up. He shouted, but before he could finish, someone was on top of him, slamming his head into the concrete floor. With the last ounce of his energy, PASCAL tried to beat off the Shadow Stalker, but eventually his vision was blurring and he was slipping into unconsciousness. He slowly lifted his hand and brushed the cheek of his killer. And then his hand fell lifeless to his side.
Miles Claythorne's flashlight was skimming through every room he passed.
PASCAL?
He called, but he never received an answer. Eventually, he told himself that PASCAL had gone off alone or covered much more ground per second than he gave him credit for. Though somehow, Miles knew this wasn't the case. He entered a room that looked like it was once used for surgery. On a rusted operating table, he noticed a graffiti design that he responded positively to. On a small pull-out shelf attached to the table were rusted tools, a few scalpels, and other unidentifiable knives. Miles picked up the largest knife.
Sick.
He examined it closely and, with the sleeve of his jacket, tried to brush off some rust. Just then, a noise resonated from an upstairs hallway.
PASCAL? Will?
Miles continued down the hall to a staircase that led to the upper levels.
Will?
Miles called as he reached the second level. There was no response, which gave clear indication.
Okay. It's Will.
Miles grinned and accepted the challenge.
Will was getting pissed. He had been waiting for someone or other to come looking for him, but still no one had.
Out of sight, out of mind.
The reactions he would get from his friends had really seemed to dull down recently. Maggie had once smacked him in the arm and told him he didn't have to try to scare them everywhere they went, but he saw each new location as a new scare. And now he had a legend to go off.
Heather Hudgerson or Henderson?
He couldn't remember exactly, but as long as the others knew her name, then it would be fine. Truth be told, There was a rush to be had from scaring his friends. It gave him a strange sort of power, if only for a second. He didn't necessarily have any power within the group, and no one took anything he said too seriously. It was once brought up as to why Will was even in the group, but the person who said it,
Probably Lucy.
was quickly quieted by some of the more good-hearted members like Miles and Anna. It was only after Maggie's offhand comment that Will decided that the group's failure to respond to his pranks meant nothing more than that he would have to do better. And so here he was, alone in the dark, hiding and waiting to scare the living hell out of the first person to come to him.
Because I want to feel that sickening rush of power as I stand above their trembling bodies. No one's coming.
And with that, Will stepped into the dark hallway. A creaking from the other end caught his ear.
Shit.
He backed against the wall. Seizing the opportunity, Will crept down the hall toward the noise, creaking only once on a loosened floorboard. After which, he froze for what seemed like an eternity until the other person made the next noise. Finally, an exhale was heard from nearby, and Will began to creep again. As his eyes adjusted, he could see a figure enter a room several feet away from him. He quickened his pace and turned into the room where he saw Miles sitting beneath the window. Will quickly and quietly made his way toward a dark corner. He knew that he could not be seen as the moonlight only shone into the room just enough to reveal Miles. Though in staring at his friend, Will began to grow nervous. Something was wrong with Miles. Will peered at the shadowy face of Miles and tried to sum up his motionless body. He wasn't quite sure whether Miles was dead, or if it was a taste of his own medicine. His mind began to race.
If he is dead.
And he knew it was preposterous, but
If he is dead, the killer is who I saw come in here.
Will fled the room as quickly as he could, but once he was back out in the dark hallway, he collided with a ledge that was jutting out. He winced and grabbed his hip in pain, realizing then that without a flashlight, he could go no faster than a quick walk. Several times he slowed to listen to the sounds around him. He was sure he was being followed. As he reached the moonlit stairwell, he burst through the door and down the stairs as fast as he could. And as he reached the first level of the hospital, he could hear the stairwell door to the level above open.
I am being followed. Pascal? Lucy?
He called, still not completely clear as to what was up. He was definitely prepared to get away if he was in danger, but he somehow thought that maybe he was being had.
Pascal.
He called a little gentler as he began to open doors. He was reaching the end of the hall when he flung open a door, expecting to see the same things he'd been seeing. Overturned tables and chairs, and nothing of use to him. He was certain that the shadow stalker was on this floor, as he had heard the door at the end of the hall open. Whoever was following him wasn't very stealthy.
Or maybe they just want to be heard?
The thought fleeted when he instead saw the mutilated and nearly unrecognizable corpse of Pascal Hobbes. Will felt his legs grow weak, but then regained his composure.
This is bad. Ugh. But what if they're just really committed to fucking with me?
He moved quickly to the end of the hall, screaming for Lucy, and immediately tripped over her corpse in the main lobby. He screamed, scrambled to his feet, and exited out of the front entrance of the Hawthorne Medical Institute. He moved as fast as he could across the parking lot toward the brick buildings. He managed to reach Anna and Maggie as they were ascending the stoop.
What's the matter?
Maggie was glaring at him as if to say,
Don't do anything stupid.
Miles and Pascal and Lucy. They're dead.
Okay.
Anna went into the building.
Anna, don't go in there! I'm serious! I think it's a lady named Heather Hutcherson or Henderson.
Shut up! You're such a piece of shit, you know that?
Fuck you, I'm not joking!
He grabbed Maggie and pulled her in close. He put his hands on her face and brought himself to her eye level.
Listen, babe, we need to go.
Will, I am not walking all the way back to the car just so you can say, "Gotcha, Mags!"
She slid her hands down his back and changed her tone.
I think we should stay right here.
Will squirmed out of her grasp and firmly took her by the shoulders.
Listen to me. I am not fucking around. They were covered in blood.
Then they're fucking around. They're getting back at you for what you do to them.
She started to undo his belt.
How does it feel?
She paused for a moment and inhaled.
Do you smell that?
What? Maggie, we need to go. Like, right now.
As he was talking, Maggie let her eyes wander upward to a few windows that overlooked the stoop. She could see Anna standing there in the dark, her face covered in shadow.
This bitch wants a show. Innocent my ass.
And then, Anna must have slipped. Because the next thing Maggie knew, she was falling fast from the window and landed directly on Will.
If there was one thing to appreciate about Maggie, it was that she was a very quick thinker. Not to say that she was necessarily intelligent, as she was the complete opposite, but quick with funny quips that usually bordered on the cruel. She was also quick in the sense that as opposed to thinking, she would act immediately on impulse. She did whatever her initial impulse told her to do without question or second thought. As was the case when Anna's bloody body crashed down on Will, something in her mind knew she was unsafe, and so she impulsively ran. Unfortunately, the direction she chose led her straight toward the hospital. If she had taken a moment to think the situation through instead of running in the opposite direction of Anna's corpse, she may have found herself back on the main road and perhaps alive. But she did not think this through.
Where's the main road? Where's the main fucking road?
As she approached the larger building, she could see a hunched-over figure moving toward her. After only a moment, she recognized it as Miles.
Miles, Jesus Christ!
She crouched beside him. She could see he was in pain. He was breathless and sweaty and covered in blood, but the untainted patches of skin were white as a ghost.
He's as good as dead.
Please, please, I need help. It's not me.
Ew!
Again, she was reminded of the immediate danger she was in.
Fuck, I should leave him. He's only gonna slow me down. No, we can't do that. Come on, Miles. We gotta go. Get up.
She grabbed him by the arm and turned around to leave. And that's when she felt the puncture of a jagged knife deep in her stomach. Will pushed Anna's body off and stood up. He couldn't stop staring into Anna's lifeless eyes. They stared up at him in horror. He shuddered, knelt beside her and closed them.
He repressed nausea at the sight of her neck, which had been deeply slit.
Who? Maggie!
He started back toward the hospital. On the trail, he could hear faint voices in the darkness, and the sound of something heavy, keeling over, crashing to the ground. Suddenly, a shrill and terrible scream, but not that of a woman. It was a man screaming, begging and asking.
Why spare me?
Will immediately recognized the voice as Miles. He could hear banging around inside the building. He could hear Miles's cries growing distant as he was dragged away. Will rushed toward the front entrance when he suddenly saw something out of the ordinary in the vast parking lot. It was a large, heaping pile of something.
What?
And as he closed in, he saw now that it was Maggie. Her white cotton tee was soaked with blood and shredded from what looked like at least 10 stab wounds. He froze. It felt like ages passed. And then he once again heard Miles sobbing, pleading.
Please, don't kill me!
And after a moment's pause,
just fucking get it over with!
Will hesitantly made his way inside the building, grabbing a large rock he found for protection. He screamed for Miles, who had stopped crying.
Come on, buddy! I need to hear you to find you!
He stood still for a moment, clutching the rock he had picked up.
I'm in control. I will take back control.
Will knew that if he was just as aggressive and just as much in control, then this murderer would be an even match. He listened for movement. He heard nothing. And then more mercy pleas. Will bolted in the direction of the screams and eventually broke into the room, his rock held high. Miles was aghast, wheezing and sobbing in a corner. He was terrified. Will rushed over, dropping the rock somewhere along the way.
Everyone is dead!
He began to pick up Miles.
No.
Miles said, his voice trembling, his eyes far off in space.
They're not!
Will felt a presence in the room, as though someone were standing right behind him. Someone or something evil.
He turned slowly, but was immediately struck in the side of the head by none other than his own rock. When Will awoke, he found himself bound to a chair with a gag in his mouth. He stared in horror at 5 other corpses, all bound to their chairs. And that was when Will knew that he was the last living, breathing shadow stalker. Then, one head lifted. Like I've said, from an early age I've known very strongly the lust to kill. I read that line, or some line like it, at a young age in a book by Agatha Christie. The line never left me, because never before had I connected so wholeheartedly to text. I've always been consumed with this unspeakable rage. I was always able to find something about everyone to hate. It wasn't long before I was consumed with what I like to call the darkness. It sounds ridiculous, I know, and obviously there was no literal darkness surrounding me.
But I could feel
it.
Eventually all that hatred would lead to the greatest and most cinematic massacre in the history of Vermont. They say crazies like me develop a god complex, and they eventually feel indestructible. But that is not how I feel. I feel complete. I now have nothing left to live for. But it doesn't feel bad. I feel that at this ripe old age of 21, I have completed my life's work. And I'm ready to die. I tried to explain it to Will, but he couldn't understand. He kept asking me, why would you do something like this? And I tried to explain it to him, but he was such a fucking idiot, so I just stabbed him. I should have saved Anna for last. I should have known it would take someone as genius as me to understand, and Will was nothing but a beautiful, perfect face. In retrospect, I suppose I took the safe route by saving him for last, but it wasn't without reason. And good reason. Will is who I needed to show what I'd done. And he knew. He died knowing that I hated him. And with as slow as his brain worked, I'm sure that it was nothing short of a nightmare for him. I'll elaborate on that later. For now, I need to start from the beginning. When we approached the main grounds, someone suggested we split up to cover more territory. Maggie, of course, had a problem with it. So I thought for a moment I might have to pair up with her and kill her first, but that went against the whole sort of plan I worked out. Inside the main office, Lucy, PASCAL, and I found cabinets and cabinets of files. As we all looked through them, I came to one of a woman by the name of Henderson. She would have to pose as my red herring for the evening. It didn't go exactly as I had planned, but somehow, I think that she was at the forefront of at least Will's mind. I skimmed the file quickly and then pretended I heard all about her and recounted her crimes briefly, and I tried to instill an uneasy feeling. Lucy was unmoved. Pascal grew uncomfortable. I heard a noise at the top of the stairs around this time, and we all knew Will was up there, honing in to find out where we were headed. I made some offhand comment, making Henderson into some sort of immortal legend, knowing he'd hear, and knowing that he'd use it as the basis of his own scares. And then Lucy left, Pascal and I smoked, and when he and I separated, I got to work. As I entered the hallway, I could see the glow of her flashlight. Part of me simply just wanted to rush her, killing her quickly. However, I foresaw these problems in planning the night, and I knew that I needed only to remind myself of the bigger picture, of my legacy, and of my hatred for them. And that would prevent me from doing anything rash, anything crazy. As I watched the dancing light of Lucy's flashlight zigzag over the file cabinets, I forcibly pulled the door shut and prepared to pounce on her when she opened it. But she did not open it. Instead, she called out, accusing me of being Will. I knocked on the door and then quickly tiptoed to the mess hall. I watched through a small opening in the doors as she exited the storage room. In my possession, I had several stones I had picked up as we approached the sanitarium's grand parking lot. At this moment, I tossed a stone down the kitchen. I moved swiftly now to an overturned folding table, crouching behind it, and waited. Soon I could hear the soft whispers of Lucy talking to herself. She was so close that I felt sure that she was going to catch me. Catch me in what? I was simply playing a joke. At least that's what I would say if she did catch me. But she didn't catch me. I had her in my sights at this point, and from my pocket I pulled another stone, hurled it as far as I could, but since I'm a smoker, I let out a fucking grunt, and she heard it. But lucky for me, the crash of the stone took more of her interest. I began to move toward her, but I moved too soon. As I began creeping in on her, she spun around and gasped, so I had to change direction, heading toward her, but not directly. I was allowing her to approach me from the side. Finally, she was right beside me, and as she jumped, I caught her by the arm and slammed her onto the cold, hard concrete floor. It was evident that she did not expect this. I felt her body lay still for a moment as I pulled my knife out. A simple yet deadly kitchen knife, just like Michael Myers. I hesitated before stabbing her because I wasn't entirely sure what damage I had done. She still hadn't moved. And then, a soft cough. And that was my cue. I began to stab her mercilessly, and it felt so good. Any second thoughts that I was having were immediately washed away. Any hesitation I may have been feeling was gone. I knew I had made the right decision. And as I stood basked in Lucy's warm blood, I felt a peculiar comfort and a faint, laughable sorrow. Poor Pascal was all alone, and I knew just where to find him. I thought for a moment about Leatherface, about wearing Lucy when I killed Pascal. The two disgusted me. It had been such a long fucking time since Pascal confided in me his feelings for Lucy. And I came to know of her feelings for him through both Will, who was as good at keeping secrets as he was at being of any use, and Maggie, who was fucking both Will and I, and was worse at keeping secrets than him. Pascal was a coward, though. The signs were all there, right in front of him. She had heard from Anna that he liked her and had said,
If he asks me out, I'll go with him.
She flirted and made herself open to him. All he needed to do was make the first move. And he never did. So as I stood above Lucy's mutilated corpse, I thought about Leatherface once more. But decided against the idea. For one thing, It would be far too time consuming, and secondly, that's fucking disgusting. I might be a murderer, but I don't want someone's flesh hanging from my face. However, she did always wear a pair of pumpkin-shaped earrings. I removed one. Though my own ear wasn't pierced, I shoved it through, and I don't know if it was the pain, knowing how betrayed PASCAL would be if he knew, or the mixed sense of Lucy's blood with perfume. I immediately got aroused. But there was no time for arousal. I needed to move her body, so I slung her over my shoulder and I dropped her near the front desk. Now it was time to find PASCAL. I don't understand why he hid when he heard me coming, but he did. And I stood outside the door wondering what the fuck was I supposed to do, so I eventually just kicked the door open. I was hoping to make some grand entrance, but it slammed PASCAL in the face and he fell back. I was instantly on top of him. As I grabbed his big, stupid head, I slammed it on the floor and thought to myself, life's too fucking short, buddy. You should have asked the girl out. At some point, before the pig passed out, he reached his hand and brushed my cheek. One final slam into the concrete and PASCAL's body relaxed. His hand fell to his side. He was dead. I needed a breather. I went into the next room over expecting nothing out of the ordinary and found a medical room that was still stocked. I grew so giddy from the sight of it that I felt lightheaded, but it passed quickly when I picked up a rusted knife. More on that later. Next is where things get interesting. I heard a noise upstairs, which I knew to be Will, and I wanted to test a theory. So I mounted the stairs, made some noise, and entered a room where I sat beneath a window in the moonlight. I could feel my body shaking as the door cracked open. Not because I was nervous, but because I was so incredibly excited. I knew he wouldn't search for a wound, and would take me for dead. But it took him a minute. I could tell he wasn't entirely sure what to think. Idiot. Then something must have clicked because he suddenly burst out of the room and I immediately got up and followed him. He knew someone was following him, but in the dark halls he couldn't know who it was. And it wasn't like Will to carry a flashlight. He liked to adjust the darkness so he could move more swiftly when trying to scare someone. Eventually, he started to call for PASCAL and Lucy, so what happened next was the icing on the cake. Like any good horror movie, Will finding the bodies needed to happen. I hoped for it, and he provided. He started opening doors, calling for PASCAL and Lucy, and I can't even describe the pathetic sound he emitted when he found PASCAL. I had moved Lucy's body to the lobby for a completely different reason, but Will finding her was definitely an added bonus. He fled the sanitarium toward the brick houses, according exactly to my plan. I sprinted as silently as I could towards the brick buildings, following what I believed to be yelling. I kept a safe distance and watched Will pleading with Anna and Maggie on the cracked stone steps of a smaller building. He insisted, Lucy, PASCAL, and Miles are all dead. To my amusement, Anna and Maggie were both reluctant to believe him. Anna was so certain that because she's so fucking smart, I can't stand it. She was so certain that Will was playing one of his stupid jokes that she actually went into the building alone. Maggie saw an opportunity to get laid and immediately took it. She began fondling Will, who squirmed uncomfortably, and I, knowing wholeheartedly that Maggie would convince him that we were just screwing with him, moved around the side and snuck in. Anna, I called silently. She stood bemusedly staring at my bloody self. I mentioned for her to follow me outside, which she did. I told her the plan, get bloody, and scare Will. She laughed, and I slit her throat. Now I was growing more nervous. I had a plan to split Maggie and Will up, but it all depended on Maggie's reaction. I needed to relax again. I pulled out a joint, dragged Anna's corpse into the building. I slung her over my shoulder and mounted the stairs. I fantasized about my calling card being the smell of my joint. I thought about Will and Maggie smelling it and knowing I was near it. I could hear as I reached the top Maggie consoling Will below, exactly as I had expected. She was convincing him that it was a prank.
How does it feel?
I entered the room at the very top of the stairs where large, painless windows overlooked the stoop. I chose the one with the best angle and flung Anna's body directly onto Will. He collapsed to the ground and Maggie ran off as I took the last hit from my joint. It was really rather excellent. I raced down the stairs and out of the back of the house. I was able to make a wide circle around Maggie because I'm really much faster than her. My hitherto experiences with both Anna and Maggie have been on completely opposite sides of the spectrum. Anna was perhaps the shadow stalker who I could say I hated the least. She, unlike the rest, was a shadow stalker for all the right reasons. She had a love of fear. She was interested in the deeper meaning of shadow stalking. She started the fucking group, for Christ's sake. Much like Will, there was a discussion as to why Anna was still in the group. Not because she wasn't liked, but because she was really too good for us. Or them, I should say. She was my intelligent, drug-free version. She was the perfect final girl, as I've heard them called. The traditional scream queen who always manages to outsmart the villain. I admit that had my biggest desire actually been to be a serial killer, I would have been honored to have Anna be the cause of my defeat. I could picture me standing there covered in all of her friends' blood, and then she somehow gets her hand on a gun, and then shoots me 6 times. Motherfucker! She'd come out of the situation stronger, harder, and haunted by the memory of me for the rest of her life. But it was not my wish. And that's why Anna needed to die quickly. Maggie, on the other hand, was no threat at all. She was a selfish bitch, and she deserved to die. As I said, I managed to get around her without her noticing. When I appeared to her, I appeared limping, injured. She immediately rushed to my aid, though I knew it was not out of actual concern for me, but for her. I have to say, I think I did a tremendous job at appearing injured. Between running from the sanitarium to the buildings, killing Anna, dragging her corpse up the flight of stairs, hurling it from the window, all while smoking a joint, bolting back down the stairs and taking the long way around to end up right in front of Maggie, I was sweating, out of breath, and a little sick. I couldn't catch my breath and actually hurled at Maggie's feet. It may have been somewhat embarrassing if it didn't clean my slate so well, and confirmed that I was doing the right thing because despite everything that was happening, she was still able to pass judgment. I heard her say, "Ew. Fucking cunt." And then she grabbed my hand, and I turned to run, but I stood up straight, grounded myself, and yanked her back directly into my knife. I anticipated that Maggie wouldn't go down so easily, and I was right. She began to hit me, and each time she did, I stabbed her again. Eventually, she slid down my body, looked up into my eyes, and fell back dead. I could hear Will coming up the path. He was calling for Maggie, of course. I bolted into the blood-torn sanitarium just deep enough and prepared myself for the final stage of the night. I screamed for help, pleaded for mercy, and then whimpered silently to myself as I listened and hoped Will would come to my rescue. He did. When he finally came into the room, I could see many things in his expressions. I could see that he had found Maggie's corpse by the sheer look of horror and sadness on his face. His terrified expression seemed to give way somewhat when he saw me. This made me wonder how this idiot could still not suspect me. It was inconceivable to all of my victims, especially Will, that I should be the murderer. After all, I'm too nice or too stupid. He came in and picked me up. Once again, I'm unsure whether it was the fact that I had masked my killing so well, that I was so close to being complete, that Will was covered in Anna's blood, or that he was holding me in his big, strong arms. But then again, I was aroused. And not that it really matters, but I do not consider myself to be a homosexual. Though from an early age, Will and I had an odd sexual tension. As childhood friends, we briefly experimented. We were far too young to delve into intercourse, but we would try different things. And then he stopped engaging. And stopped hanging out with me. We parted ways until high school, where we ran into one another at our first Shadow Stalker meeting. As children, he and I bonded over our love of horror movies and his need to scare me. We would chase each other and reenact scenes from horror movies in his bedroom. There was something about Will's fascination with causing terror that fit so well with my need to be victimized and made me curious. Even today, but like I said, I am not a homosexual. I am a victim. A submissive beta, and unfortunately, the only person who ever came close to satisfying that desire was Will. Maybe I am a homosexual, but most of whatever feelings I had for him transformed into this venomous hatred. The things I thought were funny as a child made him nothing more than an annoyance as an adult. He had become a clumsy, arrogant, stupid man, and that mixed with both the hatred and lust I felt for him is mostly what made him the final victim. Mostly. One day, after we reconnected in high school, Will and I were in his room, and he informed me on how strong his desire to scare was. I immediately coaxed as much information as I could out of him, figuring one day I might create a monster to do my bidding. But, as usual, Will disappointed. I tried to encourage him to dress up and chase me around the woods, but he called me weird and asked me why he would do that with me. My scares are for the women. They were to make them feel foolish and helpless and seek comfort from him, the man. I knew there was a sick and twisted monster in him. But I knew then that unlike me, it was not a murderer lurking behind those big brown eyes, but a potential rapist. And so, when I was injured, cradled in his arms, I grabbed a large rock that he had dropped at my feet and smashed him on the side of the head. I dragged Will's body to the main lobby, where I bound him to an old chair I had found. I had also found several other chairs and brought them to the main lobby, and then struck Will's unconscious body once more, just to keep him knocked down. And when all the bodies were in the lobby, I placed them each in a chair. It was important to me that Will see the image of us six neatly sitting in a circle, much like a group meeting. The kind of group meeting that one might expect to find in an active sanitarium or an after-school club. I had only used 2 weapons, with the exception of the rock I used on Will. I had a kitchen knife and a rusted knife that I had found in an old medical room right after I had killed PASCAL. My fingerprints on the murder weapons would mean nothing if everyone's fingerprints were on the murder weapons. And so I made each corpse and unconscious Will grasp both knives and ultimately would place the rusted knife in Anna's hand, and the kitchen knife in PASCAL's. I'll explain presently. I didn't want to leave our bodies in a circle for the cops because there was Shadow Stalker blood everywhere. What I now intend for the cops to discover was this: Will, Lucy, Maggie, and myself to be bound to our chairs in the center of the lobby. PASCAL is the only person who was not stabbed, which will raise suspicion on his part. Anna, as I wish to have her be remembered as the would-be final girl, will be just left beside his body. What I hope will be suspected is this: it should be assumed that Anna and PASCAL were the last 2 alive. Him being the killer, and she being the final victim. She beats his head in, and finally, with his last ounce of strength, he slashes her throat with a kitchen knife. That will be a lead. but it will immediately fall flat for Anna's blood is elsewhere. This will hopefully lead the cops to believe that her body had been moved after her throat was slashed, but not entirely ruling out the possibility of PASCAL being the murderer. Perhaps they'll theorize that he brought her corpse over to be weird with it, but if that's the case, then who bashed his head in? I've already burned the clothes I was wearing, and the wind has already dispersed the ashes. I put on a new outfit that will leave Will as the only person who has someone else's blood on him. Anna's blood. This may make him a suspect, but he will be fastened securely to his chair, so if he's killed Anna and the others, who tied him to the chair? I will stab myself in the shoulder outside the room where I'll be leaving Anna and PASCAL's body, and throw the rusted knife in that room. Hopefully, this will leave a trail of my blood, but make it appear that I was dragged. Lucy, Anna, and Maggie will be above suspicion, I'm sure, as they are women, and while that is totally misogynistic, I'm sure that this gory set of murders would not likely be committed by a woman as far as the criminal justice system is concerned. Which is a goddamn shame, because our friend Heather Henderson proved that women are capable of anything. Who kills a fucking dog? Regardless, the brutality of these crimes will point the finger to a man, and Will and I will be fastened to our chairs. I have arranged to slip my hand through the ropes and pull them tight until it hurts. I doubt that it will be deduced that I tied the rope myself. PASCAL will be left with Anna's corpse and both knives, but there's no way that they could have killed each other since their blood will be found in opposite locations. The bloody earring hanging from my ear will remain. The other will be removed from Lucy's ear and shoved through the unpierced ear of Anna. I'm sure it will be assumed that we were tortured by having our ears pierced, but the actual significance will be that of killer and would-be final girl. When I've tied myself to the chair, I'm sure I won't be able to untie myself. I don't know how long it will take for me to bleed to death, but I'm sure that the loss of blood will take me fast. However long and painful it is, I'm willing to go through with it. After all, I've come this far, and the only way out is through. As for this memoir, it would be neatly tucked away in an overturned file cabinet in the folder of Heather Henderson. Whoever she is, she played such a large part in this evening's events. When our bodies are found, days or weeks or perhaps even months from now, by another group of stoned teenagers, the cops will come. By the time they arrive, our bodies will hopefully be badly deteriorated and maybe even half-eaten. They will find 6 poor victims and an unsolved case within the peeling walls of Hawthorne Medical Institute. And word will travel fast, thus igniting the legends of the Shadow Stalker. Miles Claythorne.